When you examine the history of human thought, you will find early critiques of the collective in the writings of classical Greek philosophers like Plato, who warned that entrusting decisions to an uneducated multitude inevitably breeds anarchy and disorder. To circumvent this chaos, he advocated for a rigorous justice system where citizens receive precisely what they merit, guided exclusively by a philosopher king, a sovereign devoted to profound wisdom, an austere existence, and the discovery of the fundamental truths connecting all humanity. Yet it was not until the 19th century that the concept of the masses evolved into an unprecedented moral and philosophical dilemma. Thinkers began to recognize a persistent underlying threat, the human tendency to surrender personal dignity and individuality, actively blending into a faceless, abstract collective. In this journey, you and I will dissect the profound existential critiques of this modern phenomenon, exploring how four pivotal 19th century intellects, Søren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, and José Ortega y Gasset, embedded the crisis of the crowd into the very foundation of their philosophies. As the pioneering voice of existentialism, the Danish philosopher and theologian Søren Kierkegaard desperately wanted his epitaph to simply read, "The individual," though history ultimately denied him this poignant request. He fiercely rejected the growing cultural movement that surrendered personal autonomy to the overwhelming authority of the state, standing as the premier intellect to grasp the devastating implications of the rising European masses. Kierkegaard observed a dangerous societal assumption, the deeply ingrained belief that truth inherently resides wherever the majority gathers, desperately demanding the validation of the mob. He fiercely countered this by arguing the exact opposite, insisting that the presence of a crowd automatically introduces fundamental falsehood. He reasoned that even if every single person held the genuine truth privately, the moment they merged into a vocal, voting collective, that sacred truth would immediately be compromised by the overwhelming noise of the herd. When you find yourself submerged in a crowd, Kierkegaard warns, your sense of personal accountability evaporates because the burden of consequence is instantly diffused among countless anonymous peers. Within this shifting mass, the unique human being is entirely erased, replaced by a cold, calculable metric where sheer quantity ruthlessly triumphs over any measure of qualitative depth. This collective abstraction provides a cowardly refuge for those terrified of standing completely alone, effectively nurturing a herd mentality that makes malicious behavior significantly more likely. Consequently, individuals commit wrongful acts without a shred of remorse, utterly convinced of their innocence simply because everyone else is participating in the transgression. Embracing your true individuality demands immense bravery and a willingness to own your choices without scapegoating others. Yet people often find it infinitely safer to morph into a mere cipher, hiding their deep-seated cowardice behind the intoxicating illusion of collective courage. For Kierkegaard, the ultimate understanding of truth is inextricably linked to a transcendent religious framework, where you are held completely answerable to a higher power. He urges you to actively break free from the suffocating grip of the multitude, forging your own solitary path toward the divine, rather than blindly mimicking the aimless flock. True faith, he argued, can never be achieved by merely performing routine religious rituals, observing institutional holidays, or conforming to the latest trends dominating a church congregation. You must actively pursue a deeply personal encounter with the divine, carefully guarding your spiritual journey against the diluting influence of others, because salvation is inherently an isolated triumph. The exact moment spiritual devotion becomes a social spectacle is the moment it perishes, as eternal truth relies entirely on the isolated soul collaborating with the divine to achieve a genuine, equitable love for humanity. Expanding on these critical concepts in his work, The Present Age, Kierkegaard thoroughly dissects the tragic triumph of hollow abstraction over authentic human uniqueness. He identifies a primitive manifestation of nihilism, termed leveling, a faceless societal mechanism that aggressively strips away individual distinctiveness by forcing absolute equality upon every human endeavor, entirely ignoring the intricate tapestry of personal identity. To reclaim a truly meaningful existence and become a genuine self, you must actively push back against this relentless drive toward artificial mediocrity. This destructive leveling is sustained by an entity he called the public, a monstrous illusion composed of disconnected people bound together only by superficial concepts rather than genuine, shared realities. He argued that a dispassionate, over-analytical era relies heavily on the press to manifest this phantom, offering endless trivial distractions that effectively absolve everyone of authentic, personal responsibility. Building upon this terrifying cultural void, the influential German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche diagnosed the core affliction of the modern era as an overwhelming wave of nihilism. He famously attributed this profound existential emptiness to the death of God, a monumental cultural shift that left humanity entirely unmoored. For Nietzsche, you cannot possibly understand this devastating loss of absolute meaning without simultaneously examining the relentless, inescapable rise of the mindless masses. The ultimate adversary we face is the last man, a figure defined by profound nihilism and a complete detachment from life's loftiest values, displaying absolute apathy toward human brilliance, artistry, and grace. Rather than confronting the vital struggles necessary for true self-realization, this individual retreats into a shallow realm of constant amusement. To counter this spiritual decay, Nietzsche introduces a secular path to self-transcendence, embodied by the Übermensch, a concept he boldly proclaims as the meaning of the earth. This formidable ideal constantly pursues self-mastery, a drive that becomes most evident when confronting immense obstacles and eagerly accepting whatever challenges existence presents. By willingly sacrificing fleeting comforts in pursuit of profound greatness, this archetype fearlessly embraces a life of danger and risk. As the ultimate champion of existence, this figure relentlessly strives to actualize their true potential, commanding their own nature to achieve a state of exaltation comparable only to the divine. Shifting our focus, the German philosopher Martin Heidegger suggests that our fundamental condition is always rooted in our immersion within our surroundings, a state he describes as being in the world. While he acknowledges the constructive aspects of our shared social and historical environments, he warns that these same forces can foster a deeply inauthentic mode of living, characterized by oppressive conformity. This negative dynamic demands unquestioning obedience, compelling the individual to surrender their identity to an amorphous collective known as das Man, or the They, where you blindly follow societal dictates instead of exploring your own unique possibilities. Drifting through this disingenuous existence breeds a profound anxiety, stemming from our failure to take ownership of our complete human nature, and our condition as finite, mortal creatures unexpectedly thrust into reality. It remains incredibly easy for you to vanish into the mundane routines of daily life until the undeniable reality of your own mortality suddenly comes into focus. This crucial awakening represents the concept of being toward death. By finally confronting the absolute end of our existence, we paradoxically begin to live authentically for the very first time, completely unburdened by the need for external validation or social approval. When questioned about how you might reclaim this lost authenticity, Heidegger offered a surprisingly blunt solution. We must simply spend more time in graveyards. He believed that by directly acknowledging the unavoidable nature of death within the context of our ordinary routines, we empower ourselves to embrace life with maximum intensity. purposefully directing our actions right up to our final moments. Echoing these concerns about the collective, the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset warned that the mass crushes beneath it everything which is different, everything that is excellent, individual, qualified, and select. Anybody who is not like everybody, who does not think like everybody, runs the risk of being eliminated. In his renowned 1930 publication, The Revolt of the Masses, he paints a troubling picture of a society completely subjugated by the mass man, an overwhelming tide of entirely interchangeable individuals. Ortega articulates a profound dread regarding this collective mediocrity and the oppressive tyranny of a majority that views any deviation from the norm as inherently inappropriate, thereby actively suffocating both individuality and independent thought. These individuals are fundamentally defined by their relentless conformity, constantly adjusting their behavior to blend seamlessly with their peers, and a pervasive mediocrity that celebrates the perfectly average. However, it is crucial to understand that this mass man is not confined to a specific socio-economic bracket. Rather, he can emerge from any background, serving as the physical embodiment of the prevailing zeitgeist, or the defining spirit of our current era. To clarify this social dynamic, Ortega writes, "Society is always a dynamic unity of two component factors, minorities and masses. The minorities are individuals or groups of individuals who are especially qualified. The mass is an aggregate of persons not especially qualified. By masses, then, it is not to be understood solely, nor principally, the working masses. The mass is the average man." He elaborates on this transformation by explaining, "In this manner, what was mere quantity, the multitude, is converted into a qualitative determination. It becomes the common social quality, man, as undifferentiated from other men, but as repeating in himself a generic type. To form a minority, whatever it may be, it is necessary beforehand that each member separate himself from the multitude for special, relatively individual reasons. This coming together of the minority, precisely in order to separate themselves from the majority, is always introduced into the formation of every minority." Ultimately, Ortega directs his sharpest critique at this thoroughly average individual, a figure he dubs Mr. Satisfied, who revels in his own ordinariness and desires nothing more than to perfectly mirror the crowd around him. Conversely, the exceptional individual actively severs ties with the vulgar values of the herd by imposing rigorous demands upon themselves and relentlessly fostering personal excellence. It is precisely this cultivated, intellectual minority that acts as the true engine of human progress, standing in stark contrast to the stagnant swamp generated by the mass man. Scholars frequently categorize Ortega's intellectual framework as a philosophy of life, a practical approach to philosophizing as an active way of living that strongly aligns with the German Lebensphilosophie movement. The foundational pillar of his entire philosophical system rests upon the radical reality of the individual. Essentially, it is your unique reality that serves as the starting point, and everything else subsequently flows from that primary experience. From this viewpoint, the absolute truth can only be approximated by carefully synthesizing the vast sum of every distinct perspective derived from all existing lives. Much like Heidegger, Ortega successfully bridges the gap between the conscious subject and the external world, effectively dismantling the traditional boundaries separating idealism, where the world is merely a mental construct, and realism, which posits an entirely independent external reality. To describe this synthesis, he introduced the term ratio-vitalism, arguing that genuine knowledge is anchored in the raw, radical reality of existence, utilizing what he termed vital reason, a mode of rationality deeply grounded in lived experience. This profound insight culminated in his most celebrated philosophical maxim: I am I and my circumstance, and if I do not save it, I do not save myself. Your circumstance encompasses everything that surrounds your birth and daily existence, including your historical epoch, geographical location, familial ties, and cultural heritage, while your internal sense of I allows you to navigate and comprehend your place within this complex web. You are essentially an ongoing dynamic project that must be forged in the presence of the wider world. By actively engaging with these external factors, you effectively claim them as your own. This crucial integration demands that you take full responsibility for both your core identity and your inherited circumstances, recognizing your inherent limitations while simultaneously exercising your freedom as an individual, perpetually projecting toward a future goal. Ultimately, Ortega's profound reflections bear a remarkable resemblance to the concepts Martin Heidegger articulated in his magnum opus, Being and Time, perfectly encapsulated by the sentiment, to live is to find oneself in the world. In a profoundly brilliant contemporary work, Heidegger compels us to recognize the immense gravity behind these concepts. Historically, faith offered a framework where a person stood authentically before God, ensuring their unique character remained whole. Today, however, the collective crowd has positioned itself as the ultimate truth, substituting divine authority with popular consensus, exactly as Kierkegaard so astutely predicted. Although technological progress has driven the evolution of humanity, it has simultaneously magnified the tendency toward collective conformity. From an anthropological perspective, applied tools actually precede abstract theoretical science, meaning that our engagement with mechanics since the Stone Age has fundamentally shaped the essence of our mode of being. Contemporary individuals are increasingly fusing with these digital systems, and we are likely accelerating toward a post-human epoch that will introduce unprecedented hurdles for our species. Paradoxically, the very innovations that secured our current evolutionary standing are the same forces that now jeopardize our fundamental humanity. During his later years, Heidegger expressed deep anxiety that our modern immersion in mechanization severs our essential connection to existence, the natural environment, and the world itself. We have become so deeply entangled with our inventions that functioning outside their parameters is practically impossible. Humanity has engineered a complex infrastructure vital to our collective survival. Yet, ironically, this same apparatus renders any single individual entirely expendable. As immersive virtual environments become mainstream, this alienation will likely intensify, prompting countless people to flee the physical world for the tranquil security of a modern dark age. To counteract this, you must actively foster authenticity, developing the capacity to break free from unthinking societal norms and reclaim your unique existential potential. By leveraging the wealth of our cultural legacy, we can construct purposeful endeavors that infuse our existence with profound meaning, or simultaneously paving the way for future growth. The biggest danger, that of losing oneself, can pass off in the world as quietly as if it were nothing. Every other loss, an arm, a leg, $5, a wife, etc., is bound to be noticed. Here we conclude our exploration of existential authenticity and the profound impact of technology on the human condition. Thank you for joining me in reflecting on these critical ideas today.